So, has anybody actually heard of the CBI? Ah, it's good. Who's heard of the FBI? I just had the fun of sitting in the tutor group that was going on in this room a few minutes ago, and the tutor was talking about quote for the day, and he was quoting 50 years ago after the dreadful events at Selma in America, what Lyndon Johnson said to the US Congress when he very uncharacteristically, for a white American president, associated himself with the phrase, "we shall overcome," and he was talking about racial equality in the United States when frankly it was at its absolute worst. I mention that because I used that quote at the CBI staff conference a week ago when I had all of my 250 colleagues from all over the world flown in from America, China, India, from Europe for a big CBI meeting, because I wanted to think of an inspirational quote from 1965, because 1965 was the year the CBI was formed. We're celebrating our 50th birthday. We had a big bash last week. Before 1965, we still existed, but we were called something different. If I'd been here 50 years ago, I'd have been saying, "I'm John Cridland, I'm from the FBI," because we were called the Federation of British Industry, and then in 1965 we merged with two other business organisations and became the Confederation of British Industry. So it doesn't quite catch on the tongue, does it, CBI, although I think there's a television programme my teenage daughter watches, which is about the Criminal Bureau of Investigation in California, and that's called the CBI. So if I went to California, I'd have to be more careful. So what is the CBI? What does it do? We've been here 50 years. What do? We're a club. We're a club for businesses, an organisation, a membership organisation, which speaks up for companies. And we have 190,000 companies in our membership, which is about half of all the companies in Britain, employing about 10 million people. So we're quite important as a representative body for business. Many of you will know about trade unions. If you think of the Trade Union Congress, which is the national organisation for trade unions, headed by a close friend of mine called Frances O'Grady, a very impressive lady who speaks up for workers' rights, I speak up for businesses' rights. And actually, most of the time, we agree with each other. What do we actually do? What's a typical day in my life? Well, a typical day in my life is talking to businesses about what they think's going well and what they think's going badly, and then taking those views to government and taking those views to the media. So the reason I've one of my colleagues, AJ, filming me today is because some of this, the really highlight bits, if there are any, will go on the CBI website. So we can talk about business reaching out to education. And I try and do this, gosh, a couple of times a week. Sometimes it's a primary school, sometimes it's a university. Today it's a sixth form college. Tuesday I was at Oxford Brookes University doing something with their politics and business students, so something quite similar. So we're the organisation where business, trying to make money and wealth and jobs for the benefit of everybody in the country, touches politics. So I'm not a politician, I don't work for the government, I'm entirely paid by the business community, but I'm paid by the business community to be an expert on how to get government to do the things that business need done. And frankly, the reason I spend so much time on education is if you said to most entrepreneurs, whether it's somebody who's just started up their own business or whether it's somebody who's a chief executive of a big famous company, they'd say to you that the most important thing that business needs done is investment in education. Never say anything else. Because in the long term, how successful we are as a country, how successful our economy is, pretty much entirely depends on how successful you are. Because you're the next generation of talent, whether you're running a business or whether you're working in a business. And that ultimately matters more than anything else. Close second, we talk a lot about investment in infrastructure, by which I mean digital infrastructure, increasingly digital infrastructure, investment in roads, in rail, in housing, in all the things that we desperately need to keep the country moving. And then we talk about the things that government can do that can help us at a particular moment in time. And just at the moment, it's a really interesting time for anybody who's interested in where business touches government, touches politics. Because I would say the economy in this country is doing really well. I know it doesn't always feel like that. We still have a lot of people who haven't got a job. We still have a lot of people who haven't had a pay rise for a long while. We have a lot of people who don't necessarily feel that things are going well for them. But the honest truth is, we've got the fastest growing economy of any of the major countries in the world. And our economy is doing pretty well. We'll do pretty well this year. It'll grow of the order of 2.7% of GDP this year, which for a quite mature economy like ours is pretty impressive. China will grow at about 6.9%, but it's a new economy, so you'd expect it to grow much faster. So our economy is doing well, but business is worried. What's business worried about? Business is worried about political uncertainty, which is why this conversation is so interesting. So at a time when entrepreneurs think the things that are under their control, their ability to hire people, invest in their businesses, get new technology in, find new customers, invent new products, all of that's going quite well, they're worried about political uncertainty. Why are they worried about political uncertainty? Because nobody knows what the outcome of the general election is going to be on May the 7th. It's much less predictable than any election for many, many years. Bit of history. In 1951, two very famous politicians were having a general election and trying to decide who was going to get to be Prime Minister. One was Winston Churchill, representing the Conservatives, and the other was Clement Attlee, very famous Labour leader, Labour Prime Minister. He was the outgoing Prime Minister. Those two political parties, and then there was a small Liberal Party, those two political parties in the 1951 election got 98% of the vote. So the two big parties basically controlled the system, and it was a choice between, do you want a Labour government to nationalise more of the economy, or do you want to put the wartime Prime Minister, who was leader of the opposition, back in power? May the 7th, I don't know how many of you will be able to vote. Yes, great, that's good, that's good. On May the 7th, you've actually got a choice between about 6 parties, not 2 or 2.5, and the two main parties, the equivalent of 1951, David Cameron and Ed Miliband, look like on the opinion polls at the moment they'll do well to get 65% of the vote, not 98% of the vote. So our politics have changed. It's the first time in my lifetime, and I'm 54, that we've had a coalition government, and there's a lot of talk after May the 7th. Will we have a government at all, or would it be a minority government that doesn't have a voting majority in the House of Commons? So you can understand why business is uncertain about that, because it doesn't know what the policies are going to be if it can't be sure what the main choices are. Coalition government, anything can happen. Decisions are made in smoke-filled rooms, not by the voter. So it makes it much more difficult. But that's not the only reason we've got political uncertainty. We've got political uncertainty because we've also recently committed to something that's very un-British, actually. We haven't done it very much in the past, but we now seem to be doing it a lot. And that is referenda. We've had a parliamentary democracy system where you vote in an election, and suddenly we're having these referenda where you suddenly make a really big decision on one day that lasts forever. So you recall back in September, our colleagues in Scotland voted as to whether Scotland should become an independent country. They voted no, but if they'd voted yes, we'd now be negotiating the end of the United Kingdom. And possibly in the next Parliament, dependent on the outcome of the election, we'll have a vote on whether the United Kingdom should stay in the European Union. Another single vote, one day, possibly in 2017, if there's a Conservative government, and all of a sudden that decision will be made probably for the rest of your lifetime. I can remember when we joined the European Union in 1973. So these are really big decisions. How many of you have heard of the meeting that takes place in January at a place called Davos? Is that registered with you, the World Economic Forum? There were 170 private planes, flew in 78 billionaires, and they all meet on the top of a mountain. And then they let a few poor people like me go as well. So I went to Davos. More political risk. All these business leaders from all over the world meeting on the top of a Swiss mountain. Most of them like to go skiing, that's why they go there. And they were concerned about risks around the world. Very concerned about what's happening in the Middle East. Insecurity in the Middle East. Really, really big issue. A year ago, none of us had heard of ISIS, had we? I certainly hadn't. A lot of concern about Russia. Big meeting this morning, breaking news from the BBC, possibly of a ceasefire in eastern Ukraine. but lots and lots of concerns about the relationships of Western Europe and America with Russia. So you can see why there are so many issues that business needs the CBI to work on to try to get things right so that businesses can get on with a day job of having inventions, investing in businesses, creating jobs, and then paying their taxes for the benefit of all. Just say a word about how I ended up doing this job, because it's a lot of fun doing this job. You know, I'm either in Downing Street, or I'm on the television being interviewed, or I'm meeting a really impressive entrepreneur, I don't know, somebody like Richard Branson, or I'm having the chance to talk to you, all of which are equally interesting. So never a dull day in my job. How did I end up coming to do it? Well, I'm quite unusual. I've been in the same business for 32 years. I joined the CBI straight from university. I'm a history graduate. I was looking for a job, saw a job advertised at the CBI, and I've stayed for 32 years. That's quite unusual. People don't tend to do that nowadays. Actually, they did in my generation. People found a business and tended to stay with it and had a lifetime career. I've done 8 completely different jobs at the CBI. I started as a graduate and ended up as the chief executive. I've worked my way all the way through. But I didn't necessarily expect to do that. Why did I end up doing that? Well, it's a little story here. I come from a very working class background. In fact, my big brother was the first Cridland ever to go to university. So for me, going to university was quite a big thing. So I've absolutely piled into university, got as much fun out of it as I could. And there was one society at university that I got really interested in. And it was something called the Student Industrial Society. And it was about industry. And I didn't know anything about industry. I hadn't the faintest what a company was at that time. I'm a historian. I knew a bit about history, didn't know anything about the economy. And one day, we all got piled on a bus from the university, and we went on a factory visit. And we went to Coventry. If any of you have been to Coventry, and at that time there was a really big tractor factory in Coventry, but this is 1980, and it was a tractor factory run by a Canadian company called Massey Ferguson. They make those big red tractors. And we did a factory tour, and it was awful. Then, not now, great company. Then, they had really big trade union problems. The atmosphere in the factory was awful. We had a mixed group of students, particularly unpleasant for the girls amongst us, because there was cat whistles as we walked around the production line, just a really scratchy atmosphere. The week after we'd been there was a 3-month strike. That was the problem. There wasn't good relations between the bosses and the workers. Now, we don't have as much of that problem as we used to. Although I think there's a strike on the London buses, isn't there, next week? Still happens, but not so much. But I came out of that factory visit thinking, hey, this isn't right. This isn't a good way to run an economy. We should be on the same side, creating wealth, paying taxes, and then spending it. So I wanted to dedicate my career to trying to help with that. So that one student experience led me to end up doing the job 34 years later that I'm now doing. So that's my story. That's who I am. That's what I do. That's what my business does. We're the organisation where business touches politics.